Hey YouTube, Alex here, and in today's video I want to talk about why I think you need to consider the opportunities when it comes to traveling long term. And I'll get into some of these opportunities now. This is just a little bit of a mix of kind of the things that you might consider that may be beneficial to you as far as relocating is concerned. The first thing I'm going to mention is dating may be terrible where you're from. I don't care what your background is, what your gender is, what your preferences are. I think a lot of people that I've met throughout the United States, especially, are dissatisfied with their dating options. They just feel like culturally that it's not a match. They feel like personality is not a match. They feel like perhaps status is not a match. They're perhaps a high status person and they want to date somebody else that's also high status. A lot of these things can come into play. And so if you're wanting to relocate, that's something to consider is research. How is dating in that area? And enter your specific criteria. Just maybe, describe yourself as, oh, I'm, 35 from the United States and I have whatever background, and just kind of research. I'm not saying jump the gun and immediately start dating somebody on a dating site from another country, because that comes with its own challenges. But definitely be willing to dip your toes in the water as far as research is concerned, because you might find that your circumstances are much better elsewhere. I personally don't really care to date in the US anymore. And I find that as an example, Southeast Asia, I tend to have much more culturally in common. I have an Asian background, so I can kind of see eye to eye, in my personal opinion, with people that come from more of a Buddhist background than necessarily people that are coming from more of a Christian paradigm. Doesn't mean we can't be friends, but friendship and romantic relationships are quite different. I think most people watching this channel can agree with that. And while you may have friends of all backgrounds, typically when you're selecting a partner, you're choosing one person to meet a certain set of needs rather than having a group of people that meet your needs. And so definitely think about that. The next thing I'm going to mention is the food. The food may not be to your liking where you're from. I know that when I was living in the Midwest US, basically the food stinks. For the most part, it's terribly unhealthy. If not unhealthy, it's expensive. You're paying a premium for the luxury of having healthy food. You could spend it just as much money in the Midwest if you're eating healthy as you'd spend in Northern California. I know some people might disagree, but that's just been my personal experience, that if I want fresh fruits and vegetables and high quality meat and salads and things like that, I'm going to spend a premium on it in the Midwest. You might have to use delivery services that then you're paying for shipment and packaging and all of that on top of the ingredients themselves. And aside from that, I'm just not a big fan of fast food in the US, especially in the Midwest. You have a lot of food deserts. You have a lot of places that the majority of restaurants, it's fast food. And I don't really want to eat that way all the time. Now and then it's nice to have as a treat. But in my mind, it doesn't make any sense to be eating fast food every single day, sometimes even for multiple meals a day. And as a student or hardworking person, you might find yourself, depending on where you're at, reaching for a lot of these snacks and things that aren't particularly good for your well-being, but that's what you have, that's what's available. And so if you change your location, you research what kind of food do you like. If you have certain food preferences, research the different countries and places and what kinds of foods are popular. I know for me, I'm not big on dairy, so that's another reason that's nice about Southeast Asia is you don't have so many dairy options. Whereas if you do like that kind of food, then parts of Europe may be better for you as far as your preference goes. I know that some parts of Europe, it can be quite expensive, but other parts of Europe are more affordable. Of course, you have to do your research. I personally know what I like, but I would not tell you what you should like. I just like to give my honest reviews, opinions, and thoughts on a lot of these different choices that you might find yourself facing. And so yeah, definitely consider. Other places have different cuisine. If you like seafood, that's something to think about, being near an ocean. If you're pretty a big fan of beef, then you might want to look at some more mountainous kind of regions. And that's just something to think about, is that cuisine is not the same in every country. You may have American food options in a lot of these places, but the bulk of the food is not going to be American outside the United States. And So kind of moving on from that, we'll get into our next point, and this kind of describes the opportunity of travel. We just talked about the opportunity of food, and before that, the opportunities in dating. But next, let's talk about the opportunities as far as travel goes. So for me personally, when it comes to traveling, I like to be able to visit a lot of different places, and it's not necessarily easy to get to a lot of the more remote parts of the world when you're in the United States. You're talking about several flights. Perhaps you're flying to a transit airport like Taipei, Taiwan, or Tokyo in Japan, and you're not really being time efficient. And so when you do relocate, consider like, okay, I'm going to relocate to, just for the sake of discussion, Southeast Asia for a year, right? Well, before, if I wanted to visit a place like Laos, if I'm in the United States, I'm already traveling through Thailand. I'm going to end up flying to LAX to BKK, and then BKK to Laos. Whereas if I'm already in BKK, I can go take an hour and a half flight up to Laos, spend a weekend up there, and then fly back on the following Monday. And so you got to think about that too, is it's not just about your location, but it's also about your location's proximity to other cool places. If I want to go to Bali, for example, that's another thing where if I'm in the US, I'm flying to LAX and then I'm flying to Indonesia, or I'm flying to LAX, then Singapore, then Indonesia. Whereas if I'm in Thailand, I'm fairly certain I can get no layover flight to Bali and enjoy the beaches there, enjoy the tropical weather, the different kinds of opportunities for remote working. But a lot of these things are just much more difficult if you're far away from some of these places that you want to explore. It's just not practical to do these weekend trips, these week-long excursions. Perhaps if you're in the Philippines and you live in Manila, well, it's going to be a lot easier for you to fly down to Dumaguete for a weekend, presuming things get back to normal in the next year or so, but I imagine that they will. You can fly out to Palawan for a weekend. You can make plans to do these kinds of things much more easily with much less headaches than if you're having to fly back and forth halfway around the world every time you want to go to these destinations. I imagine similar things can be said about being based in Eastern Europe, as far as like if you wanted to take a weekend trip to Western Europe or a weekend trip to Russia or something like that. It's much more practical to do so when you don't have that jet lag factor. You don't have the being sweaty and dirty feeling. You don't have to adjust to the time zone nearly as significantly. That's a really big part of this, is that if I'm flying to Asia from the US, I know it's going to take me a week or two for my body to adjust to the time zone difference. Whereas if I'm flying within Asia, it's much less. It'd be a couple of days. I think that when I flew from the Philippines to Japan, it was like a 3-hour time difference or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. And within a few days, I felt fine, and it wasn't a big deal. But definitely worth considering the opportunities that you'll have if you're living somewhere different than where you're from. The final point I'll make here as far as opportunities go, and I feel like these are solid opportunities. This isn't something that can be obfuscated or perhaps disagreed with, but definitely let me know if you disagree down in the comments. I'm all open ears to people having different opinions, different thoughts, different ways of thinking about things. But frankly, if the weather is better, you're gonna have a lot more time to enjoy the outdoors. I know that I'm not personally a big fan of really cold weather. So when I lived in Denver, a good chunk of the year, I just go to the gym and work out. And it's like, okay, I'm paying all this money to live in Denver and enjoy the outdoors, but I only get to enjoy the outdoors half the year. I know some people would say, why don't you go skiing? But skiing was really above my budget after I did some research. And so like if you live, for example, like Mark of Every Man Has a Story on the beach, he doesn't have to worry about freezing cold weather in the Philippines stopping him from being able to enjoy the beach. He can just go out and swim and snorkel and enjoy time with his girlfriend and have a good time and not have to think about it. Whereas if I want to enjoy that kind of weather, that kind of experience, and I'm say in the Midwest, well, I'm having to hop on a plane and go to Florida, or I'm having to hop on a plane and fly to Playa del Carmen. I'm having to spend a lot more money and time to enjoy the outdoors in the colder parts of the year, and vice versa. If there's somewhere that you live that's extremely hot in the summer such that you can't do anything outside, maybe you want to move somewhere with more mild weather, more moderate weather, where in the summer months before, maybe you felt down because you couldn't enjoy the outdoors as much. That's a non-issue. Whether it, just like food, is not consistent around the world. It's not the same in every country. Even countries that are neighboring have different kinds of opportunities, and you'd be surprised, but if you like more mild weather in the Philippines, you can look at a place like Baguio that's up elevated high above the majority of the Philippines, and it's got much cooler weather. I know that in the Dumaguete area, it's popular to reside in Valencia if you want that more mild weather. And so think about that too, is even if you have heard of a certain country that you're interested in, but you don't like dealing with the heat, there may be opportunities within that country to get to places where perhaps you can deal with the heat a little bit more easily, or places where your lifestyle dictates that you're not just cooking in the urban jungle. I know I'm personally a fan of BKK, Bangkok, city and capital of Thailand, but some people feel like, oh, I couldn't live there because it's so hot. I could live in Phuket because at least, even though it's hot, I can go down to the beach. I can go swimming and snorkeling and do different kinds of excursions and really enjoy the tropical vibes. So that's something to think about. I hope this video has been helpful. Definitely let me know what you think down in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and give us a thumbs up, and I will talk to you soon.